The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata, which is our very own mind. Well, maybe we need a little bit more light on the subject, just a little. Didn't want it so much in the side there. What is this very own mind? There are many pointers, many teachers and many different Buddhist traditions who have expressed very enlightening teachings. One of my favorites is Gogun, who is the Dharma successor for the Chan masters Shengyen, and his books are quite excellent, very helpful in terms of directing us in deep practice. Other teachers like Joko Beck, who died some years back, also were able to express the teaching in very effective ways from a different angle, from a more Western angle. The challenge with Zen teaching is that what we aim to recognize is beyond words. And so how do you explain something, or how do you direct somebody to training in a work that goes beyond words? Well, we have a few hints. One is from Longchenpa, the Tibetan Buddhist master from, I think it is the 10th century, who taught about how to work with difficult feelings. Most of us grow up, as Joko has mentioned, developing a core strategy to take care of our core belief about who we think we are, who we assume we are, based on how we have been treated as children. When we come into this world, yes, we have a personality. Anybody who has worked with tiny babies recognizes that. Even just having my own 2 kids, it was pretty clear that they were very different from the very beginning. Even though their birthdays were only 2 years and 2 days apart, so theoretically they fell under the same astrology sign, but the sun sign in astrology is not the whole picture. But we won't need to get into that. The experiences of each child growing up, even in the same family, can be very different. My own growing up experience was vastly different from that of my brother, and vastly different again from both of my sisters, who were born much later, the last one when I was in high school. Some of it is what we come into this life with, but you don't have to buy that. It makes sense to me. And the rest of it is what we draw from our experiences to make sense of the world around us, and how we interpret it and how we maneuver through it. And I spoke a great deal, the first 3 teishos of this sesshin, about adverse childhood experiences and how they can affect Zen practice, impact Zen practice, because we are working to see through the results of those childhood experiences. Let me quote Joko Beck again. That's a very wise teacher. Let's see if I can find the page. I have had so many places now with tags on them. I have to find the right one. She starts with, when we practice, we begin to understand our mind. We begin underneath our thoughts to experience. For the first time, once we see underneath all the thoughts we have covering up our experience, what does that feel like? That unknown place is where that practice is, not in the endless analysis of our thoughts. And over here, I think it's on this, the birth of a core belief. The baby does not know what to do, so it grows into a child. It works out its own plan. And when things go wrong for you as a young child, as they will, you can't conceive that it's because the adults around you might be something less than perfect. And anyone who's been a parent has recognized, hopefully, that we're all in training. None of us come equipped with even a handbook on parenting. There have been plenty of books written on parenting, some of which are quite delusional, and others may have a core of appropriate suggestions in them. But we also come in with our own belief systems, our own personalities, and that also impacts our children. And so the children grow up, if they're fortunate, with a positive core belief, a sense that they are worthy human beings. But if they grow up with adverse childhood experiences, whether it is abandonment, which can actually come from, as I was mentioning yesterday, simply something going on with the parents that prevents them from being present in the child's life, whether it's a sickness or a death or mental illness, something that goes on that prevents the child from being able to really nurture a child in a way that is healthy and affirming for that child. Then the child automatically assumes, this is classic, it's well known in psychology, that when a child experiences adverse childhood experiences, the child assumes that these awful things that are happening to them are happening because they're no good. They're bad. Something's wrong with them. And therefore they're being treated in the way they are being treated. That's never the case, I would say. A child comes in innocent, and of course it makes its needs known, but the needs are basic. A need to be fed. So when a baby is hungry, they start crying, fussing. If they're wet and uncomfortable or cold, the same thing. That's the only way they know to alert the adult caretaker to come to their assistance. And if a parent is immature, insecure, having their own issues, or absent, those basic fundamental caregiving experiences aren't experienced. And again, the child assumes that it's because something's wrong with them. And so they develop what Joko Beck called a core belief, a strategy, how to get their needs met. Whether it is, the terrible twos are infamous in child rearing, where the child has gotten to a point where they kind of know what they want, and it's more than just being fed, or that they're sleepy and want to go to sleep, or that they're cold and want to be warm, or that they're too hot or they're thirsty or whatever, basic needs. This is about, and I think about my great-granddaughter, who is famous for coming to you. She knows how to get in the refrigerator, pull out the gallon of milk, and pull out the chocolate syrup and come to you to make her chocolate milk. She is just 3 years old. And chocolate milk is apparently a favorite of young girls, at least, because my granddaughter also was quite fond of the stuff. And I have to admit, for a passion for it myself in my younger years. So kids learn how to get their needs met, more or less. And sometimes they don't get their needs met in a consistent and nurturing way. And again, that reinforces that core belief of not being good enough. And so we come to Zen practice. And guess what? The core belief of not good enough rears its ugly head. I spent a whole year with people patient around me at the Rochester Zen Center when I would be in tears the entire sesshin. Sesshin through sesshin through sesshin through sesshin through sesshin. Because I was bumping right smack into my core belief of inadequacy, helplessness, unlovability, all the rest of that. And the experiences I had in my life kind of seemed to reinforce that. But then I also have learned since that when we have a belief about ourselves, we draw to ourselves experiences that will reinforce it. It's kind of amazing. I liken it, I have an image in my mind of everybody in the world going around upholstered in one or the other type of Velcro. You know, Velcro is that stuff that there's a curly side, little hooks, and there's a fuzzy side. And when the two meet, they glom together, and it's kind of hard to pull them apart. Well, we, with our core beliefs, run around in one type or the other of that Velcro. And when we meet somebody with the opposite type, zoom, there we are in some challenging relationship, usually. Zen practice, as challenging as it is, and it's challenging because we are sort of, for a long time, trying to paddle upstream against the current of our core belief. And so it's hard. We cling to our core beliefs. And at one point, Joko speaks to that. Where is it? Because the core belief is a fixed, rigid assemblage of thoughts, it keeps running our lives in a very false way. That's what we do. We don't necessarily like our core belief, but we're used to it. To disrupt it or anything else we're used to is frightening. We don't want things to change very much. It's scary to consider change. If we're not who we think we are, then how are we going to figure out how to navigate the world? This is a big challenge for all of us in Zen practice. And by the way, I am sharing from this new book of Joko Beck's that was put together from her teisho tapes by her daughter. And it's called Ordinary Wonder, Zen Life and Practice. And Zen Life and Practice really is filled with ordinary wonder. So to continue, We don't necessarily like our core belief, but we're used to it. To disrupt it or anything else we're used to is frightening. We don't want things to change very much. We'd rather have something outside change so that we can feel more comfortable. We don't want our partner to change. Well, actually, that's not necessarily the case. We would like our partner to change in a way that would be affirming to us. We don't want to have to look at ourselves in a way that would wake us up and make us change. As human beings, we like things to be fixed. It feels safer if we know what we can count on. However, in this day and age, it's very clear that that's kind of precipitous. Right now, there is a wildfire raging in California, forcing many more evacuations. Last I saw, it had consumed more than 200,000 acres of area and burned many structures and forced many people out of their homes. We have tornadoes. We have floods. I think of Chicago, where there are, anytime there's it's usually a train track or a subway, not subway, an L track that goes over a road, the road goes under it. And so you have this deep dip under road. And when it floods, which it will during rain, the water naturally gathers in those deep places. You'll be forced to avoid that, or else risk trying to drive through 4 feet of water. There is the ongoing drought. There is the ongoing flooding. Recently, I saw that in Arizona, they have been receiving 6 inches of rain in an hour, which is an enormous amount of rain. When you're designing a parking lot, usually the maximum rainfall you design for drainage for is about 5 inches. In most places, you don't have to design for that much rainfall or that much accumulation of water. And so they're in the desert, where it just doesn't sink in very fast, and you end up with floods, flash floods, and so on. It's again a very precipitous life. The same thing in New Mexico. Periodically, we will get the flash flood warnings, even though up here, high in this mountain valley, we are not in a place where we will get flash floods. And you drive down into Chimayo, and you'll see mud and sand all over the roads where there has been a flood, and there are many arroyos that you have to cross. I know a friend who lives in Tasuke, and there's a big and relatively narrow and deep arroyo there, and he has seen 6-foot walls of water coming down that arroyo. In Albuquerque, they have containerized, is the term, the arroyos there, and people will mistakenly, when there's a little bit of water, and go in and play in the water, and suddenly, all of a sudden, there is another wall of water coming down, and it washes people away. Not to mention the fact that at certain intersections in Albuquerque, there are standing waves 6 foot high. There are all kinds of challenges these days in the world. The weather, climate change, the rising seas, and all the intense weather that seems to be coming out of climate change. Where is there any security? Really. I remember many years ago reading in a magazine about a man who was an American man who was living with his family on the 9th or 10th floor of an apartment building in, I think it was Iran. And he was working there. He had a job there. And he had this awful background fear that he was living with for about a year and a half. And then one day there was an earthquake and his apartment building tumbled to the ground. I don't believe he was there. I think he was at work or something, but his wife was killed instantly, or she appeared dead when they found her body in the wreckage. His daughter was badly injured and died 2 weeks later. Curiously enough, he wrote that after that, he had no fear. I had a sort of a similar experience. I used to be quite frightened of flying, and being the wife of a diplomat in those days, we flew a lot to get to Southeast Asia, particularly inland in Southeast Asia. You couldn't walk, you couldn't take a train, you couldn't take a boat, you flew. And one year when we were living in Thailand, my husband was involved in dealing with 3 plane crashes in the 2 years we were there. 2 of them were military. There's an American military presence in Thailand. It was during the Vietnam War. And in one case, he had to go and dig the remains out of a fighter jet that had crashed into a paddy field, and it came down with such force it went 10 feet deep into the earth. Another one, which impacted us, our whole family. There was a commercial airliner that Thai Airways flight that crashed in Chiang Mai on landing. The pilot had tried to land in the fog, and the airport was at the base of a mountain. There were 2 roads, one leading directly up, well, there were 3 roads, one leading directly to the end of the runway, 2 on either side of the runway. And at the time, neither the pilot nor the co-pilot were buckled in, by the way. And the president, the rector of Chiang Mai University Medical School, was on the flight, and he was familiar with coming and going there. And so he was standing in the cockpit door, trying to direct the pilots in the landing. And they mistook the road they thought was the one leading up to the end of the runway. It turned out it was the road that was along the side of the mountain. And they realized this too late. And by that time, the plane was going so slowly that what I was told was that basically it slid down out of lack of momentum and crashed and started burning. The pilot and the co-pilot were killed. The rector of the university threw himself backward as soon as he realized what was going, and he was hurt. And several Americans were on the plane. One of them was killed by something flying through the air. It was back in the era before they had closed bins, and something clipped him in the head and killed him instantly. His wife ended up with a broken arm. His 2 little boys, who were the same age as my little boys at the time, were relatively unhurt, although quite severely traumatized. There was another American woman who was badly injured. And we were very, very involved. The whole family was very, very involved in helping these Americans. My kids shared their toys with these 2 little boys. And curiously enough, after those 3 crashes, plus a previous incident when we were living in Burma, where I was almost in a mid-air collision with in an airplane. I lost my fear of flying. On the other hand, my younger son, once we realized, we took a train down to Bangkok when we were leaving at the end of the tour and flying back to the States. And as soon as he walked out on the runway and saw that we were going to be boarding an airplane and flying home, as soon as we got onto the airplane, he threw up. So anyway, that's a little bit of a side story. Basically, there is no security. However, in another way, there is. When we let go of who we think we have to be, there's an amazing amount of freedom available to us. But it takes a lot of work to reach that point. Decades of practice, I would say lifetimes of practice, for me anyway. And it is possible. I want to share here now some of the teachings of the Sixth Patriarch. Huineng, as most of you know, I think, was an itinerant young man whose father had been a Chinese government official, high enough that apparently he had a falling out with the local authorities, and so he was banned to a far remote part of China. There he married a local woman who was itinerant, and then they had this little boy. When this little boy was 3, right about the time when he would probably have been given basic teaching by his father in learning Chinese characters, learning how to read, learning how to write, and so on, his father died, leaving him alone with his mom. And of course, back then, this is a long time ago, centuries ago, there was no social security, there was no insurance, there was no way of surviving beyond what they could manage themselves. And so they would go into the forest and gather branches and twigs and so on, and sell them as firewood. And that's how they eked out a living. And as you know, at one point when he was 19 years old, delivering a load of firewood to a client, he overheard an itinerant pilgrim reciting some of the Diamond Sutra. And the phrase or the sentence that he heard that opened his mind, caused a kensho for him, was arouse the mind that abides nowhere. Arouse the mind that abides nowhere. That's what we are doing in our Zen practice. That's what we're working for. Working toward uncovering that mind that abides nowhere, that isn't caught in a core belief, isn't caught in strategies to try to maintain and survive. When we can open to that mind that abides nowhere, the initial opening is frightening because, again, there's no ground under your feet. But then there really isn't any way, is there? Nonetheless, it is quite frightening initially. But as we become more and more familiar with that sense of no ground under our feet and daring to walk in to the experience of not thinking our way through things, of letting go our stuff, and that's not something we can calculate doing. It naturally unfolds based on our Zen practice, and our Zen practice fundamentally being Susokan, the extended out breath, with curiosity, with an openness to possibility, with a not knowing and openness to knowing over and over again. And we can also work for those of us who are inclined in that direction with koans that can help move that along as well. But we all come to practice really as through a natural koan. There's something that has brought us to practice, whether it is a very sense of discomfort in our life, a sense that what we know of our life is not fulfilling, that we haven't found a way to make it fulfilling, or that we've experienced pain and suffering, or we have a sense that there is something beyond how we ordinarily experience life that is worth opening to, worth returning to. And we put all of that sense into the experience of the out-breath. We're not trying to use, for example, the out-breath to block uncomfortable feelings. That is absolutely not the way to go. And, in the past years, many years, it was something that people did use, not so much as the extended out breath, but they used the koan mu, for example, to kind of elbow everything else out of the picture. This is about opening to what's beneath our thoughts. And through that, we go into the sense of our body. That's the doorway into that experience. And we work at this opening to possibility. And gradually we begin to get insights into our behavior. And that is a pivotal point, particularly when we realize at some point we will, if we go deep enough, that we cannot trust our thoughts. That is a big start. And I want to jump here again, as I said, to the Sixth Patriarch, who naturally grew up without much in the way of thinking. He spent his life out in the forest doing physical labor, gathering wood. And of course, he had an early childhood experience of losing his father. So there was some motivation there for him to be curious. And then when he heard that itinerant pilgrim reciting that part of the Diamond Sutra, it was enough to trigger an opening. And so, as you know, he went to visit the Fifth Patriarch, which was quite a hike. It probably took him at least a month of walking north to that monastery, and simply going into the back of the monastery as he was ordered to do. He was not ordained, and only ordained monks could sit in the zendo. He had no training in doing zazen, but he had his own natural, innate questioning, wordless questioning, necessarily wordless questioning. So he was content to go into the back with the other lay people who were basically supporting the temple by their efforts, raising food and taking care of preparing food and so on. And he was assigned to hulling rice. You can still see the same place that he did that in. And eventually, after 8 months of just being there, not feeling a need to be important enough to go find out what the teacher would say, the teacher came to him and he had recognized as soon as they met when he first came to the center, that he had a depth that was beyond, or he had opened to a depth that was beyond that of his other monks. And of course, he eventually became the Sixth Patriarch. After which he headed back south again, and he stayed closeted. He did not go out and teach. He stayed continuing to deepen for two different versions of this, 10 or 15 years. And then finally, at one point, he ventured out there was a talk going to be given by a priest at a temple, and he went to hear the talk. And that's where there was the famous encounter that has become a koan. It's typical in China and Japan when there's going to be a talk by the teacher to put a flag up. And it's sort of an announcement flag at the front gate of the temple. And there was a couple of monks arguing about whether these flags were flapping because of the wind, or whether it was the wind itself. I mean, the flags themselves were flapping, and they were arguing back and forth. And the Sixth Patriarch encounters this and says, "Venerable monks, it's your mind that is moving." And that made the abbot of the temple sit up and take notice. And he had heard that somewhere in the vicinity was the Sixth Patriarch. And he asked if he was, and the guy announced or said, "Yes, I am." And so the priest asked him to give the lecture. And he did a series of talks, which are well worth studying. They're known now as the Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch. And this book was translated by some Chinese monks. I think they're brothers. It's a beautiful translation. It says, "The Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch on the Pristine Orthodox Dharma, an original publication of the Buddha's Universal Church in San Francisco, translated from the Chinese by Paul F. Fung, who's got a whole lot of letters after his name, A.B., M.A., M.D., Ph.D., and George D. Fung, A.B., M.A., M.D., Ph.D. And the part I'd like to share with you is where he is beginning to teach the precepts and the vows, the Bodhisattva vows. He has taught a repentance ceremony. And at that point, after that, he says, "Now that we have made this act of repentance, we should all make the 4 great vows. Each one of you should devote his mind to complete attention. We vow to deliver all beings within our own minds." This is sometimes translated as we vow to liberate all sentient beings. And it's commonly assumed in Western Zen that means we will liberate other people. Yes and no. It's much more complicated than that. Let's continue. We vow to cut off the limitless passions within our own minds. We vow to learn the limitless Dharma within our self-nature. We vow to attain the highest degree of Buddhahood within our self-nature. And then he goes on to explain these. Virtuous and learned counselors, if you have the great compassion, how can you not vow to deliver all beings without limit? But in so doing, it is not I, Huineng, that is delivering them. The beings within the mind are those which are called the erroneous and deluded mind, the vicious mind, the deceitful mind and false mind, the attached and jealous mind, the evil and poisonous mind. All such types of minds are, quote, all beings, close quote. Everyone must deliver them from his self-nature. This is called genuine deliverance. And this is another way of putting what Joko is pointing to. Seeing through the nature of our self-concept, of our core belief, of our strategy, our life strategy. The practice is, it's like, I remember there was a group of Mexican Sangha members at the Rochester Zen Center at one point, and one of them said to me in Spanish, he'd been assigned to cleaning windows, and he said, cleaning the windows, cleaning the mind. And that's the case. As we do our Zazen, open to possibility, extending the out breath, which basically helps us in a major way to focus on what is beneath thought. We begin to get insights into our behavior. They're not necessarily fun experiences. I've often said that if I had a dime for every time I winced at a realization about my own behavior, I'd be a millionaire by now. In another way, I am, because it's such a relief. Even though it's embarrassing, it's mortifying, it's not a pleasant experience to recognize that you said things with tones of voice that you've said things with the subject matter that you've said, that you expressed dysfunctional behavior in so many different ways. Once you see it and have the experience of offering it radical acceptance by tuning into the sense of remorse and regret in your body, it is amazing how much lighter it is. Not only that, but it's almost like it automatically puts up a flashing stop sign the next time the habit energy of going in the same direction of that pattern comes up. It's like blink, 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 blink. Do you really want to do this again? And you don't. It gives you space. You don't have to. It's easy, which is kind of bizarre. But as part of that, you have to tune in to how it feels in your body. That is an absolute essential part of the process. And that's exactly what Longchenpa was teaching as well. When he said, and I paraphrase here, that when any of the negative experiences come up, feelings come up, that you tune in. The first inception of the sense of that feeling, you tune into its natural energy, and you stay present, fully present with that sense of energy. And then in the midst of that sense of presence, it becomes freed in its own place without having to become gotten rid of. So if you find yourself in anguish, if you find yourself in rage, if you find yourself in grief, if you find yourself in jealousy, whatever it is you find yourself in, as soon as you recognize this uncomfortable bodily energy, go right into the experience of that. How does it feel? What kind of energy is it? Is it sharp? Is it flashy? Is it dull? Is it heavy? Is it catching in your throat? What is it? And you tune in and you feel until it dissolves. And it is absolutely miraculous what happens. Because not only does it give you space around the feeling so you don't automatically do a knee-jerk reaction to it and maybe cause more pain and suffering, but it offers clarity so that if there is a response that would be appropriate, it's clear and you naturally go there. It's quite an amazing ability we all have if we're willing to open to it. So when we recite that first vow, the Bodhisattva vow, sentient beings are numberless, I vow to liberate them. That means to become increasingly aware of we ourselves are caught in dysfunction. To own it, and in the process of owning it, recognizing it, and accepting that, okay, I've done this, I don't want to do it again, then it's so much easier not to. And he goes on. The beings within the mind are those which are called the erroneous and deluded mind, the vicious mind, the deceitful mind and false mind, the attached and jealous mind, the evil and poisonous mind. All such types of mind are, quote, all beings, close quote. Everyone must deliver them from his self-nature. This is called genuine deliverance. What is the meaning of self-deliverance within one's self-nature? It is to deliver warped views, passions, ignorance, grasping, and all such beings within one's mind by means of perfect view. As soon as you have perfect view, then the wisdom of Bodhi, or enlightenment, will demolish those ignorant, grasping, deluded, and wishful beings. One delivers each by the appropriate means. And again, that just is another way of saying what I just said. And he continues on. As to the vow to cut off limitless passions, it is to use the prajna wisdom of self-nature to eradicate empty and false thinking from the mind. And it's eradicated by allowing ourselves to become present with it. Owning it, accepting the unpleasant feelings that engenders, and through that, releasing its bondage to us. As to the vow to study the limitless Dharma, this is the necessity to practice constantly of the orthodox Dharma of seeing into one's self-nature. This is the meaning of genuine learning, opening to the truth of our being. As to the vow to attain the highest Buddhahood, this means that when you can always have your mind under the discipline of the real orthodox Dharma, letting go of both delusions and awakening, and when you have prajna always arising, casting off both the real and the unreal, then you will see the Buddha nature. Then you will attain Buddhahood at the mere mention of the word. The way to practice these vows is to do it constantly from moment to moment. And we practice it moment to moment through Zazen. It's a miraculous practice. It's difficult, it's challenging, but every single one of you has everything you need to do it perfectly. And doing it perfectly means letting go of what you think perfection is, who you think you are, what you think you need to be happy. Oh, this has been a little bit longer teisho than usual. And in fact, I think we've gone not quite over. So we'll stop now and recite the 4 vows. And I thank you very much for listening. Please work hard at practicing this. It will make so much difference, not just in your life, but in the life of really all beings, because there really are no boundaries except in appearance. And as most of you know, our state of mind is communicated far and wide, whether we intend it to be or not. And so the more clear we can be, that clear state of mind is also out there for other people to open to and be nourished by.